Hey folks, it is October the 16th and we're discussing chapters 48 and 49 out of our books. And this has to do with just a little glance at castles and knighthood. So giving the folks in class a little bit of time to discuss these terms we have up on the board so far. And those terms are: what made castles useful, life in the castle, becoming a knight, chivalry, and games. And so we're going to talk a bit about that in just a moment and all that good stuff.
No, they made it into a movie. And they almost canceled it. They almost canceled it. Yeah, exactly. That's how I looked at it. I was like, that doesn't have to happen. Does it have to be that way?
And she's like, what? I was like, yeah, she'll be just like, y'all can't say it. My mom goes, yeah, you can. Did your mom run with his hair? I was like, yeah, mom, she called him just this. And then mom looked at me, she's like,
It's
and I was like, yeah, I think my mom too. My mom, I think my mom too, she was like,
it's
All right, that is time, everybody. So I need your attention real quick. So, of course, as you've read, castle's made up of many components, and it has two primary reasons that it exists. And the first is it's a means of defense for the lord and the community surrounding it. Because even medieval, simple fiefs understood that the primary reason that they had any kind of governmental existence is to ensure the physical safety of people. That's why governments are the primary reason governments are supposed to exist throughout the whole world. It's very basic. And so, I mean, even tribal societies in the Amazon understood that with their village chiefs. It's a human universe. So, of course, the keep is the first thing. Of course, you have a keep, which is essentially a defensive place that's a rather large home for the Lord and his, of course, servants and family. Early on, these were wooden. The earliest castles that existed, say, after the fall of Rome and things like that, we don't really have much evidence for anymore because they're wood and they're rotted. We could see some points of their foundations through archaeology, but decay has a way of getting rid of that. In many ways, they probably looked more like feast halls from like Beowulf, like a big mead hall where the warriors and the servants would get together and feast and pretty much it.
That's just how it is.
It doesn't change. Well, see, that's the thing. I mean, what's the difference between history and literature? It's not much. History is just nonfiction. So we have turrets, which of course are mounted upon towers. Towers are very important because within any basic combat, having the higher position provides you a tactical advantage against your enemies. They also understood the ideas that modern soldiers understand, having cover. You'll see that these are cut like teeth. And the reason is so you can hide behind them, but you can also expose yourself in order to fire down upon your enemies. A very defensible entryway with the drawbridge, really standard there. as castles expanded, they tended to add outer walls. So if one wall fell, they could fall behind the next one. Water being extremely important because, shh, guys. So during these times, those siege craft is going to become more and more advanced with miners and sappers who can dig underneath walls, siege towers, ballista, trebuchets, and things that could throw immense stones to knock down the walls. Usually, the way you overcome a castle is you kind of starve out the people on the inside. And so that's why they often had large stores of grain. Often lords would, whenever they would have extremely high grain tax on the serfs, and they would store a lot of this so that in case they were sieged, they would have a lot of food. A source of water is a must for a castle, whether through well, a natural spring. You could also have access to a riverway, but that's going to be pretty dangerous because those could be blocked off or they could leave an exposure. So here we go again. Here's one with multiple walls. You have an inner wall and an outer wall. A moat, which is usually a man-made waterway around the castle. That way, ladders and siege towers, which are brought up to the walls for soldiers to climb up on, are rendered useless. Now, of course, they could still find ways to overcome moats, sometimes through draining, sometimes through bringing under the cover of shields, bringing enough earth and rocks to actually make a land bridge to the wall. But these things are, of course, always risky. And so, yeah, you got a place to fall back and fight again if need be. And then last but not least, you could fall back into the keep, kind of like the Alamo. When the Alamo wall fell, many people went inside of the Alamo building to hide. And they really were go though. We remember the Alamo still. Medieval castles weren't very worried too much about angles like forts will be later in the age of gunpowder, which you'll notice are usually shaped like stars, and there's a reason for that. However, you do see that the cool thing about towers is that if you're an archer, you have a very large field of fire and observation because it's round. So that allows for a 360 perimeter for you to have your guards to watch or to rain down death. Of course, one thing I didn't mention is you see it's missing here, but you could often build kind of like how painters will have scaffolds. You could have scaffolds here for archers to stay, or if not archers, soldiers to be there to push down ladders. So go back here. Of course, you see they have all these things so this could be within a keep or within the castle itself with separate buildings. And of course, a chapel, bedrooms, meeting hall, kitchen, stables. Often there'd be a basement, which could act as a dungeon or a storeroom. Sometimes it would also be the last place where you could have family members hide if the siege failed and if they managed to take the keep. And then often you would have the women and children go down to the cellar or the dungeon and lock the doors, hoping that the fighting would stop. Because often when a siege happened in medieval warfare, and this was something found in Europe and throughout much of the world, is that one of the ways that you helped pay your troops was you let them take whatever they want whenever they won the siege. And so that would kind of give them incentive to be a little braver whenever they're going over the walls because they have a chance to get rich. If they make it over, slaughter some people, and then they find some gold. And so they would try to wait out that period, which could last anywhere from a day to 3 days. And then hopefully be caught and either set free or ransomed off. I believe this castle is in England, as is another one. But here you see a rather large moat around it. It really is. It's like a lake or good sized pond. Um, Here's one I know definitely is from England, and you see here, you see these windows that are cut in specific shapes, and so a lot of this has to do with they're trying to make an area where it's cross shaped, so you have a field of view left and right, and you're able to look up and down, but you're also it's narrow so that if somebody's shooting arrows at you, they're having a hard time. However, if you stand back, you have the advantage of a wider view. Of course, here we have the portus, which is the gateway. You see that you have troops that could stay up here, dump heavy things down, or boiling water or oil and stuff as the guys try to go through the gate, which would have a dropping portcullis that could come down and defend it. And if they decided to, they could open the walls behind it in case they wish to attack with arrows, and close the gate and close the door behind it as well if they wanted more defense. Towers come in many shapes and sizes for various reasons. As time goes on, the tower in the castle is more ornamental, as we'll see later. It's going to become more of a status symbol. Like when you start having castles that kind of look like the Disney castle. Those castles aren't built for defense. They're really just built to be a super mansion later on. Of course, we have, I believe these are Italians actually, and this is supposed to represent a knight and a squire. I actually think that's his son. I forgot the name of the guy. But this is more of a Renaissance painting anyways, a late Renaissance painting. When armor is at its high point and it's its most advanced, mobile, but it's the most useless because there's gunpowder and they're shooting holes through this stuff. Chivalry is actually a French invention, and the idea of chivalry is, yes, it's going to be highly influenced by Christianity, but it's mostly going to be a romantic idea that's going to be put on the age whenever knighthood is kind of tottering towards the end. When knighthood was at its height as far as being most impactful for warfare, the idea of chivalry wasn't really that big. You're going to have works of like the Tales of King Arthur and stuff, which is a French tale of an English king, is going to have massive influence later on the ideas of knighthood. But during its height, it didn't have that big of an impact. So whenever a young man became a knight, he had daily training, and his training was composed of horsemanship, combat, physical strength. There's still existing manuals on how to train squires to be knights that are still around today. And yes, it was almost entirely physical fitness. The children would spar, wrestling, all sorts of weapons. And here you see they even have things like they're learning some of the arts, such as music, recitations, how to care for armor. They're also the servant to the knight that they care for. And so in many ways, you would think of them as kind of like a really lowly slave. However, they didn't have light at the end of the tunnel, because if they receive this status, knighthood's going to set them up to where they have a different set of laws for them, whether it's in criminal court or a lot of things. They could also, if they're a knight for the right lord, they could have their own set of land, their own manor, and even a castle. So knighthood could be a really good bridge for success for a lot of young men. Jousting is going to be like the top sport for like people of France and England in particular. The lances were often blunted, but there were deaths all the time through broken bones or splintered wood in particular. People loved watching jousting. Of course, they had other events too, such as sword fighting, wrestling, things of that nature. Boxing and stuff like that was frowned upon in Christendom at this time. It was seen as a barbaric thing that only like the ancient Romans and Greeks would do. but they were really into wrestling back then. And so you'd have tournaments where you just have like this big cluster of knights, essentially have mock battles where they're like clubbing each other in the head. I'm sure they didn't really know much about concussions back then, but I'm sure they lived it. So you see up there, you have the ladies watching, you have gentlemen watching. They're holding up their banners, and these banners are have the coat of arms. In medieval Europe and all the way through the Renaissance, lords had coats of arms, which were their own flags. But a coat of arms also meant that you had permission under your king to have your own army if you wished to. And so this represented not only your noble house, but also your authority to have an army. And so this is one thing that's going to be cracked down on later on when they try to get rid of private armies at the end of feudalism. And as you've seen in your readings, like that's a big problem, like say the church is going to have with feudalism. It's like you guys are always fighting and killing each other for no reason. So, not exactly peaceful. All right, so simple question. What made castles useful? Why would they even need something like that? Defense, yeah. So yeah, protection in an age of constant warfare. So that's one reason. That's a good reason. Now, what did this serve as the base for? What was this the symbol of to the serfs and the peasants? You know what? Riches, yeah. It also had status and the seat of government. So this is where like if one peasant wanted to bring up charges like we've seen in their legal system against another peasant, they would have to go to the keep, and inside the keep is the Lord's hall and his court, and there they would be like, hey, he stole my sheep, or he kicked my kid, or something like that. Hello. All right, he's going right up. Hey, Hunter, up front with your things. You won the goodbye lottery. Huh? For now. All right. So yeah, so castles had a lot of uses. Yeah, and they didn't just protect the knights, and they would look over the walls and watch all the peasants die. I mean, the peasants were supposed to flee and seek safety with their lord if they were invaded. So it wasn't like 100% exploitation, though there was plenty of that. All right, so life in the castle. So for the nice lords and all that stuff, what was their life like in there? I mean, were they watching Netflix all day and eating tendies? Boring. So yeah, as far as we would think, not much for entertainment. So a lot of it had to do with outdoors. And hey, that's the life they wanted to live, and it was very useful for them in their livelihoods. So what would they do? They what? Fire. Yeah. So lots of fighting, especially training for fighting. Speaking of hunter, yeah. So often hunted for sport. That's something that nobles could do, but peasants were not allowed to do, because throughout most of history, hunting was seen as a practice for warfare, right? So like ancient Greeks believed that. So this was something that young men did, and went out and learning to kill and to track, some use of weapons. And so something they didn't want the peasants to do because they didn't want them to rise up. And so, what about inside the keep's walls? What would they do? Chess, yeah. So, they mentioned that a little bit of reading for the literate. What about,
What the just
yeah, feast, jesters, and minstrels. So guys making music. And especially later on, you're going to have traveling like little mini circuses go around, or you would have thespians, like traveling actors, go on and put on plays and stuff like that. You're also going to have like traveling people who are like astrologists and fortune tellers and stuff like that. That's going to be a big thing. Especially like after the Reformation, you're going to have like a lot of alchemists going up to kings and kind of like swindling them out of their entire fortunes, promising them like immortality and stuff like that. And really, all they get is like mercury poisoning. So note to self: don't try to drink alchemic formulas. All right, so becoming a knight. So what's the first step to becoming a knight? Well, yeah, but what's your title? Yeah. So the first step is you got to be born to the right mom and dad. So you have to be born to the right station, the right class. But yes, so born into the night class. We'll just call it night class because remember that was just below nobility. The nobles could go through this process as well. See, young boys started as squires. And the thing is, the process to become a knight is just like the process we're going to see that people are going to learn trades to go from like apprentice, journeyman to master. They're going to base it off of the process to become knighthood or to become knights. And so it's kind of like, it's not like one of those things. It's like, yeah, you got a crawl before you know. See, and yeah, so they learn fighting and especially horsemanship, because you're not a knight if you don't have a horse. And you're a foot soldier. Yeah. And so after a squire, then what do you become?
Knight.
Yeah, knight. So when of age, I don't remember. It's probably around like the mid-teens, like 16 up, I would imagine. So when of age, what was that term for when you became a knight? Yeah. And when you receive
be thou a good knight.
Your accolade. And see, the thing is, and become a knight. And so, where do you think we still have accolades today?
England.
America.
Oh, wow.
U.S. military. Whenever you receive certain awards and stuff like that, you might have your unit line up in front of you, and they all like pound it in your chest. Like, well, in the airborne wings, certain ranks and stuff like that, combat medals. And so then you take your shirt off, you got a bunch of blood and bruises, but that's an accolade. You get struck, and it's a sign that you've kind of graduated into something else. But yeah, now, one thing, of course, we left off is this was also a religious event. So, like I said, they would go through fasting, a period of prayer. They would go to mass, which was a church service, and they would be preached on, like all the good things to be a good knight. So it wasn't, remember, these people weren't secular in anything. Everything had a religious element to it. So, Yeah, chef, all right. So, what is chivalry?
Being nice.
Okay, that's part of it. That's part of it. So, which means, so if somebody's nice, we would call that, what'd you say, moral? Okay, yeah. So really, it's a code of morality. Idealized. Because not everybody lived up to it. For a Christian knight. So it's like your book's correct to say that this is like a mixture of that old Germanic militarism mixed with Christianity. And that's one of the things about Christianity. One of the reasons it spreads through so many parts of the world and Europe is it's able to adapt and even in some ways adopt things of the culture that was there in the first place. And one of those is chivalry does this with a lot of this old Germanic idea of being a brave, fearless warrior who enjoys battle. Well, with chivalry, you also add stoicism. So I kind of like the idea that you don't like seek to use your power at the ruin of others so that you can gain wealth and things like that. To remember that there's people below you that you're supposed to be relatively charitable to, not harming the weak and the innocent. So it tries to add some of that, because if you'll recall, that's one of the things that the church at the time was constantly like wrestling with, was like, we got all these guys out there who are living for constant warfare, and it's making a lot of chaos and pain and death for people that don't really need to happen. So, games. So, what did knights do? And also nobles, even royalty. We're going to find kings are going to joust one another for fun later on. Like Henry VIII and the King of France are going to do that. That's how they're going to become good buddies. Through wrestling matches and jousting. So, what were the games?
You just said
Good. I just wanted you to pay attention. So yeah, jousting and tournaments.
Yeah, sword fight.
Yeah, jousting, tournaments. Yeah.
Wrestling?
Yeah, sword fights, wrestling.
I thought they thought wrestling was barbaric, so we didn't do it.
No, it's boxing. It's boxing.
No boxing.
Yeah. Well, that's what I do. I mean, if you look at like that's like something about wrestling and a knighted feudal society. I mean, Japan, they were doing the same thing when they had their feudalism and their class of knights called the samurai. They really loved wrestling. Of course, they called it jujitsu. It's the same thing in many ways. The human body can, because what's the point of punching somebody who's wearing armor? Ow, But wrestling, the joints all work the same way, and you can like take somebody prisoner, and now you're rich from a ransom. So it makes sense. So, sword fights, wrestling. And all that stuff. So guess what? It's all like combat sports. It's a feudal military society. So it's all about doing mock fights for fun. So that's what they did. And societies love having a form of entertainment. But your book's correct in pointing out this is aristocratic. That means these are entertainments and the culture of like the top 3% of their society. Most people were poor, stinky serfs, my ancestors covered in fleas and stuff like that. And so they didn't do these things, you know what I'm saying? So they're on out in the field growing the wheat, eating mold and stuff like that and getting sick from it. So we're talking about like the upper crust of society. Throughout next week, we'll talk about a bit more about serfs and peasants and farming and stuff like that. We're going to end our lecture for today, and I'll see you later, kids. Have a good weekend.
Yeah. Can I go get a computer?